minutes. And anybody who's been in any one before will laugh at the 45-minute number because I tend to be prolix from time to time. And more of them will be towards the 90-minute side than the 45-minute side. And tonight I'm talking basically an introduction to what we're going to try and go through together. The course is called Mystery, Wisdom, and Modern Thought. Thought you'll have to decide for yourself whether that's there. And at the end we'll talk about what mystery wisdom is. But for the moment I want to talk about modernness. Because modernness involves a concept of time. And time is a curious conception when you begin turning inward. It's a curious conception all the way around, because for the most part right now, time is measured by space rather than by time itself. Because we measure time, because it's right now everywhere. But we say it's evening here because of the spatial relationship that we have to the sun. The sun has set. And so we measure time by space for the most part. There are exceptions. In music, we actually measure time as time. And it becomes much more valuable and much more important. I think everyone has realized the experience of time changing in its value according to the interest that you have. Where if you're interested in something very much, the time seems to pass very quickly. Because time is a potential, and is the potential in which spirit becomes manifest. In the same way that space is a potential in which matter or material relationships become manifest. And therefore, when we're filling the potential, the time itself seems to be filled up, or seems to be packed. And for that reason, it doesn't seem to be long and extended. Now, when we're talking about modernness, something being modern, in terms of the mysteries, that has a much different value than it does in terms of clothing or records or something like that, because modern in terms of records means sometimes a matter of weeks. Whereas, like in some things in astrology, you can study, like if you're trying to understand the precession of the equinox and see the precession of the equinox visible in the stars, it takes a full 72 years to see a difference of one day of a heliacal rising of a star. And so it's something that takes very great patience. Anybody interested in heliacal rising of stars, I can take a little. Heliacal rising of a star is the last day that you can see a star before sunrise, and then when you can see it after sunset. Those are called heliacal, or last day you can see it before sunset, and then the first day that you see it right before sunrise. And that is to say that every year, so many days from the solstice, the sun at sunset will eat up a star so that it can't be seen right before sunset. And then there are so many days, and then you can see it first thing in the morning again. And that number of days is constant. But over 72 years, it takes one day less from the solstice to the day that it gets eaten up by the sun. And so you can spend your entire life before you can notice a difference between one star change. When you get to real mysticism, time becomes even more relevant, or very changing much more, because time is measured by span of attention, or the ability to hold consciousness on a given focus. Like for most people to even look at an object with their eyes visually, or with their mind's eyes for more than a moment or two is a very difficult task. Some people with great practice have gotten control of their sensory perception, have gotten control of their internal faculties so that they can hold their attention on something for a very long period of time, an almost indefinite period of time. And something happens when you develop such a faculty. Your moment of the present, the now, expands further into the past and into the future. So when we're talking about things that the mystic consciousness deals with in terms of modernness, we're talking about things that modern means 5 centuries or so. And we're not talking about something in the last 50 years or something like that. We're talking about a modernness that is only a few centuries old. So the concept of time is very much different. Now, if we look at time as it is recorded in history, whether that history is a mythical history or a traditional history or actually a recorded objective history, we have a trend running from one extreme to another. Let's call one extreme ancient and the other current. And in each of, these are directions. Funky ideas about time tonight. But the more one goes into ancient times, the more extreme attitudes one incurs. The more one comes into our present times, the more we find polar opposite attitudes from the ancient attitudes. And what I want to look at those attitudes because they represent the stream of history that we have passed through. That our consciousness, either all of humanity or ourselves, in terms of rebirths or reincarnations, we have passed through these phases, and what we are and where we are going and how we get there is relative to understanding this. The ancient outlook was more of a mystic outlook. The current attitude and outlook is much more materialistic. And there are some interesting outlooks about all of this because the whole world was seem different in ancient times than it is now. If you go very, very deep into the past and just take the attitude about matter, or the stuff of this world, in very ancient times, matter was considered an illusion. That it wasn't the reality at all. On the other hand, in the modern world, matter is the only reality. That the spiritual worlds aren't at all important. Each of them develops a special kind of problem. What has happened with humanity thinking that matter is Maya or matter is illusion, it has led to people who have gotten stuck in that outlook because in some ways the past and the ancient still lives. To a large extent, it is associated with different parts of the globe because the evolutionary impulse has followed the course of the sun. And to a large extent, you can even say that this is more like the East, whereas this is much more like the West. And a lot of those attitudes are still prevalent in the East. Why should I bother to do anything with the world? Because I'm really a spiritual being anyway, and this is all illusion. Why should I get sucked into illusion Why should I get carried away with something that isn't true? Whereas the Western world has come up with the conception that whatever you can get away with without getting seen, the better off it is. Like why waste yourself? Like to a large extent, anyone who looks at mysticism in the Western world is considered, there's a classic word for it, they're called dreamers. And, like, why waste your time in that kind of hocus pocus or that kind of humbug? And so we have, in the Western world, we have come to do a lot with matter. We have overcome it, but in a way we've overcome it in such a way that we're bound to it, and we're bound to it in a way that our mistakes in it become all important and become our whole life rests on. Even the perception of the external world is different in the East and in the past than it is in current times. In the past, since the outer world was considered illusion, people were taught to eschew the development of the senses. And as a consequence, there was a development of a kind of diffuse consciousness, not necessarily a nihilism, but a vaguer type of consciousness, and people were taught to not pay any attention to the senses. Whereas in the Western world and in current times, the senses are all, like we actually even become sensualists, and we think that anything that we don't see isn't a reality. Now, all of these things carry on a lot further. In ancient times, people believed that spirit was the only reality, and it was the only thing that one could rely on, and that by putting consciousness into spirit, one was in touch with all knowledge, with all being. In the Western world, spirit is considered illusion. In fact, in most circles, like if you spend much time visiting around a psychiatric ward or someplace like that, and people start talking about spirit or spiritual worlds, they consider that, they have a classic word for it, they call it crazy talk. The reason I was chuckling is I've had a lot of friends who have toyed with mystical and occult things in ways that have been very destructive. I've spent a lot of time visiting them in psych wards as a result of their following dangerous practices and getting themselves into trouble. And very often I've been sort of a liaison with the external world for people that are in the psych wards. And I'll never forget one instance where I was visiting someone, and I was sort of a contact person, and the doctor called me up. This was a psychiatrist that was new to me. He started talking to me, and I started talking in my normal conversation, which is not normal conversation. And he said over the phone to the nurse, "This guy's crazier than she is." And so you get the idea that matter is the only reality, spirit is an illusion, and we have sort of a deep spiritualization, and the highest quality that comes in the Western world is sort of a humanism. And it unfolds into cultural and into a stance or philosophical view of life, such that in the ancient times, everything was done by faith. Like you were revered according to the degree of faith that you had and how much you believed and how little you questioned. Very much different in current times, because there has been a very great change in consciousness, because when we have taken our consciousness away from this ultimate unity, this indivisible unity of spirit is all there is, and we start focusing into matter, so you realize, now I think it's that it's crazy being that matter has gone, that you're dividing particles, I think you're making up particles. I think they're a product of science. Like, a lot of our science laboratories are science factories where they manufacture new subatomic particles all the time. But, they're subdividing realities and subdividing, and it's led to a type of consciousness where it's not all just a blase yes, as it was in ancient times, but it is either a yes or a no. Are there two parts of hydrogen to one part of oxygen in water? And so we've gotten to, in the Western world, having a very yes-no kind of consciousness, and the focus into the human mind, and the human mind's ability to separate and differentiate and tell the difference between one thing and another. Skepticism has actually become a matter of pride now. And it's resulted in two different kinds of outlook for spirituality. Because spirituality in the modern Western world has to be altogether different than it was in the ancient Eastern time. Because in the ancient Eastern time, people were not introduced to the world, the external world, in the way that we were, and it didn't have that effect on their consciousness. And as a consequence, they believed in God because they had no choice. They had no choice because that's all they knew. In the Western world, we believe in God because we can doubt and because all of the doubts can be answered. So the outlook is a totally different outlook that it's more like a show-me attitude. It's more like a matter of being able to prove that something is the case rather than a matter of acceptance. So the belief has been substituted by doubt. And the philosophies that come out of these whole stances in the extreme are also polar opposite of each other. Like the philosophy that came out of the East was like a fatalism. If there is only one source behind everything, then everything is connected. Everything is one, and therefore any occurrence that takes place must be the will of the Great Spirit. And it must be tied together. It must all be connected together. And consequently, we have what in the Orient is called the doctrine of avatara, which is a doctrine that everything is tied together in an irreversible, in an unbreakable way. It is what most people call karma. Only karma, in its strictest sense, having no room for creation within it, it is bound together that is very, very legalistic. So as a consequence, so looking then at events that happen in the world, it became a very fateful world. Now, out of the West, out of the skepticism, we have laws, but since we have called spirit illusion, then there is no causal force behind everything, and so that we have just the opposite here. Like, for example, all of us, it's almost as absurd as the Eastern doctrine. By accident, a blob got in the right temperature and pressure conditions, and the first, like, little single cell being began. And, like by a whole series of accidents. Everything is random. Everything is fortuitous. That the whole world is a result of accidents, and those accidents produce what are the words that they call mutations. And through these mutations, the whole world changes, and then we have to relate to the fortuitous circumstances in the external world, and we evolve accordingly. So it's very funny. In the East, people in the ancient times felt they had no control over their life at all. In the West, everything is a matter of chance. Not quite so much a matter of chance if you'd be a different person if you had eaten a different breakfast this morning, or if your parents had eaten a different supper before you were conceived. But it's not quite that bad, but it's along those lines. And so we feel that everything in the world is a matter of randomness, and some people even feel that the laws that we see in the cosmos are a matter of human intelligence just wanting to tie them together, just wanting to tie the world together, and that there may not even be really any laws out there, because there are so many different ways that you can, like, for example, if you read a modern physicist like Feynman, you can describe gravitation by 4 different models, which are very much different from the other. And they each describe the phenomena perfectly well, but they can't all exist at the same time. And so the Western world, strangely enough, somebody semi-east had captured the epitome of the Western world, Dostoevsky, when he had this character named Shatov in The Possessed, which is Possessed by Dostoevsky. Shatov is associated with the leftists that are forming this cell about the time that communism was coming up in Russia. And they were all sort of nihilists and very much of Western materialistic thought. And Shatov came to the conclusion that the only act that we have that's completely free from random activity or even the possibility of law is to commit suicide. So the only free person is a person who can suicide, because then they would be going against any laws of nature that there would be, and they would be going against any chance, because that would be upsetting the freedom. Strangely enough, it gets echoed a few generations later in the people who also developed a philosophy in the heart of materialism that balked at it, the existentialists came up with similar ideas about suicide. Okay, so we have then basically 2 outlooks. An ancient outlook that all of the truth lies within ourselves, and that's all that counts. It's sort of like the attitude that we have the joke now, I already know the truth, don't bother me with the facts. And the current view in the world is all of the truth is outside. Or in the classic example, is the good taste in the lemon pie, or is the good taste in the palate of the person, or in the appreciation of the person who eats the lemon pie? And the person from the ancient times would say, the lemon pie doesn't even exist. But if you deign to eat it, because it is your destiny to eat it, any appreciation comes from within yourself. And in the Western world, the outlook would be that certainly the good taste is in the pie itself, and we would go to great extremes and in yuppie fashion put all of the best ingredients possible in it to make the most grand and elaborate pie of all. Now these are 2 attitudes, and if you look at them, even in terms of the continents, like between the East and the Old World and the Americas, there are even differences in the flora and fauna and in the diets and in the cultural differences, that into the smallest detail, that there's a difference between these parts of the world and the types of things that were cultured there and the types of things that were even found there. Because if you look if you look in the Old World, you find tigers and elephants and things like that, which you don't find in the Western world. But in the Western world, you find things like tigers and porcupines and such like that, animals that are completely different. And if you look, even the types of plants are different. Like basically, there is a tendency to find more sedative plants, more opiate types of plants there, whereas most of the plants that are exclusively New World plants are the stimulants, like cocaine and all of those things are the stimulants. And so there are really differences. In fact, in the ancient world, rice, a plant that grows beneath the water part of the time, it has that subjective quality about it, as a simple, refined, delicate kind of food is what the ancient world was like. And the ancient world was very inclined towards vegetarianism. If we look at the current world, if we look at the Western Hemisphere, we find a plant that is even found in the East, corn. And it even goes into our language that we say that somebody who is coarse from eating a fine grain, a rough grain like corn, we call them corny. And as if to say that they're crass and they don't have the delicacy or the history. And the Western world has been extremely carnivorous in its diet, going from the BCU on. If we look into the Eastern world, the ancient times people wore loose, flowing types of clothing. And the more we come to the West, the more we find tighter clothing and clothing that is broken into pant legs and things like that, rather than togas or saris or stuff like that. The attitudes of outlook are very different in ancient times. If you read ancient philosophy books, because they have the whole conception of unity, because they have the whole conception of oneness, the outlook is circular. I could draw these ones, but I can't draw this. I myself that way. I can, but I didn't this time. Whereas, as those are circular arguments, where the conclusion is in the original definition. And you keep looking at things in the same circle over again and again. And if you look at some of the conceptions of cyclicity in ancient times, they have a quality of futility, because they think that the cycles in all of the worlds are illusions, are again Maya, and to be caught in that kind of a cycle is so harmless, the same thing over again and again. Whereas in the Western world, there's a tendency to be more linear. That is, this follows this follows this. There's much more of a conception of direct, straight line progress. It's not the same thing happening over again and again and again. The differences go in such a way, though, that the straight line type of consciousness is relative to a circle. A straight line is tangent. And we do have some of that tangential consciousness. We have a disposable type of mentality. We're not coming back to the beginning where it's just rolled off. And as a consequence, we have a world that is very fast becoming a refuse dump. Rather than in the ancient, quite a bit of the East is that way, that no scrap of anything is lost. Everything is recycled. And so, like the outlook, the way one thinks is different in the current times as opposed to the way we thought in ancient times. The concept of spirituality in the ancients is a concept of seeking bliss, whereas the concept of the West is seeking pleasure or seeking improvement. Now, the thing that both of them say is we have the truth. There are adherents of the very ancient outlooks of mysticism that are still in the world, and they say we have the truth. And no doubt, if you talk to almost any scientist on campus, They will very lucidly explain to you about the scientific method and show you how it is a way of finding the truth, and that this is the true outlook about reality, that we're describing things as they appear to be. Now, the peculiar thing is that in some ways, both are correct, but both are false. That the outlook of each is all of the things that we have stated about ancient mysticism are true. And all of the things that we have stated about materialism are true. However, they're extreme statements. Somehow we've gotten into a place where we have gone from extreme to extreme to extreme. And it's part of a whole process. And it's an especially important process now when I start sermonizing, preaching, because in terms of time, in terms of history, we are a relatively short way off from the beginning of the Victorian age, something like 500 years approximately. And we stand relative to the Aquarian age in time to where Augustus Caesar stood relative to the beginning of the Pisces age, about 400 or 500 years away. And there's something that works well in mass psychology as well as in individual psychology. The time that we have to study is when it seems that all the best movies are in town. And when we have to confront something new, especially if it's unpleasant, is the time that we always remember to go back and finish up something that we didn't finish up earlier. And psychologists call this a reversion, that when we don't take the ego strength of life energy, which psychologists call libido, to meet the current problem or to meet something new, there's a tendency to revert back to something old. And as a consequence, at the time of the Caesars and even late Greece, the religions of the Aryan age had been somewhat outgrown. And to accept the new step forward, which to the proud Aryan age consciousness, the new step forward, which was going to the age of Pisces, which was an age of piety and an age of sacrifice, to the proud consciousness of the Aryan age, that was just unthinkable. And the new thing was something very much different than was expected or than was in the consciousness, in the pride of the Greeks, in the pride of the Romans, of what they valued very highly. And because they couldn't meet the test of the future, which very few can, it's very difficult to always be accepting something new instead of trying to redefine it in terms of something of the past. Just recently I had an experience of being with people and looking at new people that I've never seen before, and having associations about what they must be like, because they have these features in their face which are somewhat similar to other people I know, so they must have these types of qualities in them. There is a true scientific argument. I won't get into that, but there is such a thing. And but instead of accepting a new person as they are and letting them describe themselves to you, and accepting the future and letting the future and the newness of the person flow into you, there's a tendency to trying to find them in terms of the past. I had that experience with mangoes, for example. The first time I ever ate a mango, and I tried to think, what does this taste like? I came came up with that. It was a teach transubstantiated. But it was a lovely poetic phrase, but it was still trying to define anger instead of anger for itself. And so what happened in terms of the Romans is their religion no longer answered, and they could not accept the Christianity of the time, which was a perfect antidote to the hubris that they had developed in their character. They reverted to Mysticism and Mysticism and all sorts of things like that had been around for a longer period of time. In our own time, we are again confronted with the idea of accepting the future, accepting something new, and we're in that stage before the changing of an age that the lessons of Orthodox Christianity, as Orthodox Christianity has stood, do not seem to be sufficient. They do not seem to be adequate for our spiritual needs. And to look forward to something new is very difficult. And so there are a lot of tendencies in the air right now to go back even further, because our consciousness is bigger and because we're much more aware of, we have much more information from ancient times available to us now than we did in the past. Now there's a tendency to revert very far past, very, very deep into the past. So, what we have to look at is progress, forward going, but not in a destructible fashion. And we have to look at cycles, but not in a humdrum way, because the truth of reality from a spiritual point of view, this would be a rather authoritative statement, is that the progress of spiritual consciousness as it expresses itself in matter is neither a line nor a circle, but a combination of both. Most things, whether it works from the formation of a nebula to the formation of leaves coming out on a tree, all of these things manifest in terms of spirals. Spiral having the quality of being both linear and cyclical at the same time. There is the repetition that allows for perfection, and there is the delineation that allows for progress. And so we'll look at life and we'll look at the world in terms of spiral. A spiral that goes from within out and from without back in. One might say, according to the observations of seers, of mystics, of mystery teachers of all times, that in the current loop of the spiral that we've been speaking of, in the horrible types of drawings, you can say this is in this direction is spirit, in this direction is matter, that in the current loop of the spiral, we've been going deeper into matter and are now coming back out of matter. This is going to get into much deeper in the course. Ancient times were when we were coming into matter. And obviously, when things are getting tougher and tougher, and like a child, we begin to grow into adulthood, and adult lessons are so hard, and always wondering if the child is lost, and it seems like you're just going to be making a problem for all the rest of your life, and you're just going to have to fight all of this stuff, and you're going to be sick all the time, and you're just not get along well with people, and people that you love the most, are people that you get along well, and you're least well with. And there's a tendency in that, in the same way that psychologically, when it becomes too hard to keep on growing up, when it becomes too hard to get through the middle of life, so that we can get to that wonderful state of old age and sort of solve it all, there's a tendency to revert back to childhood, the childhood ways. There's a tendency to be very backward in that way. And this is why the way of thinking, if there is bliss, and if one is obedient to the divine, and obedience is a mystical watchword, whereas disobedience and skepticism is a watchword in our current times, if one is obedient, then there is that very reversionary, that very reactive way. We find it in people that are mystical even in our own time. We got to go back to the old ways. We have to go back to the foundation. And that's what ancient times were like. Current times, we're so deep in matter that we think that because we're across the room from each other, there really is no connection between us. And it's just a very clever thing on the part of humanity to invent a language that we can somewhat understand each other, even if what we have to say is meaningless. So this is where we stand now. The whole idea is that much as we would like to psychologically, much as it would be tempting spiritually, you can't go back. Especially once you've learned the ability to say no, or once you've learned the ability to call a shovel, and once there was a lovely movie a few years ago called 1,000 Planets, in which there's this very unorthodox man that was raising this little boy, and he, there's all kinds of crazy happening things, and finally the social services were going to take the little boy away from him, and he was afraid about losing the little boy, because if he had the choice of either fitting into society or losing the little boy, and he eventually fit back into society once he knew that the little boy could see a pony and know what a pony was and was willing, and something like that. Once you have the ability to see what is and what isn't, you can't go back. It's sort of like if you lived in a world that had no music, you wouldn't miss it. But when you have once heard music, when you've once been exposed to the truth, you can't go and say it isn't there anymore. And in this regard, our evolution, our development, our creative process, once we have come into materialism as we have come into it, we can't go back. We can't become simple mystics. We can't merely exist in a blissful type of consciousness. Now, through our logical development and through our self-consciousness and through seeing our ability to affect other beings, we now recognize a responsibility, a creative responsibility, and we can't go back. You just can't, like if you have a child, when a child is born, it's all altogether different. You can't let go of that child. You know what I mean? You can't just let it die. You can't expose it as they did in the ancient Greek myths. You can't do that because it's responsible, and you love it and you care about it. And to a certain extent, that's what our consciousness is like. We can't go back. We have to go forward, but in doing so, forward does not mean going into greater extremism. It doesn't, like from a spiritual point of view, we can't take any extremist standpoint. We can't be sexist, because we know in our next life we may be a female. I might be a female. I can't be down with women. Or we may be born in a different racial body. We may be born in a totally different social circumstance. To a large extent, we can't take on all kinds of extremist attitudes. And so what the hope of this course is to assume that when a person has reached a degree of sensitivity, that when they see a poster or read an ad that says mysticism or that talks about spiritual worlds or something like that, they don't laugh at it. And it's not a matter of morality, because for some people, they are locked in their bodies, and that's where their evolution is deep in materialism. But some people are passing in their individual course as well as in the larger cosmic course. Some people are passing this nadir of materiality, and we have grown up. I don't mean to say that I'm a paragon of maturity. We'll be sure to come out before too long. But we have grown through matter. It isn't enough for us. We want something more, and we're looking for something better. And so what this course is going to be an examination of ideas of mystery. And according to mystery wisdom, some of us never fell into these extremes. Such as in ancient times, they didn't get locked into ancient thought. And in current times, they're not locked into materialism. There are people who, by their efforts, individuals who have been receptive as well as assertive in such a way that they have maintained a balance and an insight all the way through. And that is to say that it is possible, and we've all experienced it from time to time, to be in the midst of something and to be watching it at the same time and to be seeing its end, to be experiencing something almost the way you can watch a bad movie, a bad horror movie or something like that. You can see it and you can be carried along by it, but it isn't that engaging such that you're swept away and that you lose yourself in it, that you can maintain yourself. Because there is, I'm sure we've all had the experience, it's almost like reading a detective novel, the latter part of the detective novel, and you say, yes, the clues were there all the while, and it was all just laid out for me if I only would have seen. And there are times in life when we can look and we can start making connections, and we can see that what we've experienced, that there was an inner meaning to it all along, and that there was a general trend to it all along, and that there was a purpose to it all along. And what mystery wisdom is a science or a philosophy or an art that has been developed by people who have watched, and by faculties that have been developed that we all have within us, have developed these faculties to a very, very high degree, and through them can see the intent and purpose of evolution. This is not mysteries in the sense of the mystics where they say, well, that's a holy mystery, as if you're not supposed to answer it. This is mystery in the sense of the word that it can be solved. And so this is going to be a survey in modern thought of the basic mysteries that have been with all of humanity for all of our evolution as human beings. What are we? In fact, what are we composed of? Where are we going? Why? The big words in mystery wisdom, there are two very large words. Let me just put down some assumptions. I guess I'll stick closer to my notes. We're going to look into the basic mysteries of whence, how, and whither. Where did we come from? How did we get here? Where are we going? What are we? Such like that. We're going to look at them because we have passed through the Western material world, and we have to deal with the logic and with observation and with first-hand experience. That doesn't mean we're all going to sit in here and have enlightenments, but the way the course is going to be done is going to be done in such a way that it's going to assume that we've been in Western culture, we've had our upbringing in skeptical Western science, and so we're going to ask questions about how these things happen. And we're going to try and understand from our own experience. We're assuming that we're here, that sort of like from the good part of the East, like we have faith, that there's a reason why we were put here. And so we in the Western culture are put here so that we can develop our reason, and we have this type of growth, and therefore the course will be conducted in harmony with our culture, what we've grown up with, what we've learned, and so we'll try to approach it in a reasonable, skeptical way. And we'll try and take into account history, and we'll try to take into account the irreversibility. And we are going to begin from our direct experience, and we're going to try and question things. The two biggest words in mystery wisdom are why. We're going to try and look into the whys and wherefores of as many things as possible, and preferably a lot of people, as the material starts coming down and as we start getting into things, I very much appreciate if there were a lot of questions along the way. Sometimes the questions may anticipate things that are coming along down the pike, but that's all right if they're asked ahead of time. And the other thing is to see whether it actually works, because like the alchemists, like this is, I don't know how to say it any other way, but this is the real thing. We're in this for all the marbles. And like the alchemists, it's, like to a scientist, like we went over to the chemistry building and saw some of the experiments that were going on there. When the scientist walks out of the laboratory, it's done. But in the great experiment, when we do the grand transmutation in ourselves, we can't ever leave ourselves. We can't escape ourselves. And in the great experiment, we can only prove it to ourselves. And only when we have accomplished the alchemical wedding, or only when we have lived it through, then can we know that it's true. You know what I'm trying to say? So in all of this, the other big word, truth. Okay, and so we're going to be looking at this. We're assuming that we are divine. We're assuming there is a truth, and we're assuming that if we put ourselves to it, we can discover the truth. However, I can't discover it for you. Everybody has to do it for their own. And that's basically what the course is going to be. Okay. One other thing. What we're going to be dealing with is very vast. This will be just a little side trip. We missed about a quarter of the notes. It's okay. I want to go back. I guess it'll be all out of time. We're going to be dealing with subjects that are very large, very vast. Probably, if you're interested, this course is probably going to go on in 3 discrete sections over 3 years. This year we'll cover just basic fundamentals of human experience. And next year will probably be a series of talks called Cosmology in Everyday Life, which takes the ideas of cosmic creation, all of the different creation formulae, as found in mystery teachings of all different ages. And not only looks into the cosmogony and cosmology, but it tries to take the principles out of it and apply them in everyday living so that it's workable. But because some of the things that we're going to be dealing with are going to be very vast, everything has to be put into a perspective. Now, the living quality of the myths, the trying part of it, throughout the descending arc, initiations into the mysteries, where one was initiated into the power to leave their body and to unfold what most people would call magical abilities. Those initiations were conducted as plays. Like if you take the Eleusinian play, the mysteries, they were acted out as plays. And it uses the same principle that is used in psychodrama or cosmic drama, that by living yourself as something else, you can experience it. And when you experience yourself as something more than you normally conceive yourself, you open things up. And from a spiritual point of view, all myths represent very deep spiritual principles that have many different sides to them that can be understood in many ways. But there are special myths that relate to the mysteries themselves. And I want to talk about one of them in terms of a danger that could come up with a course like this. And it's a myth that is common, well, if you're familiar with the Dionysius myth, or the myth of Osiris, or the myth of Orpheus, or the myth of Adam. In each of these myths, the original creator, which represents the universal knowledge, is broken into parts. Like we know that Orpheus is torn into pieces and that the head gets thrown into a stream, and as the head is floating down the stream, it's singing yet. And in the case of Dionysius also gets ripped to pieces. And in the case of Osiris is cut into 13 different pieces by Typhon, and the pieces are put hither and yon, except for the generative organ, which Isis has. And gradually, that's the potent organ, and gradually by getting the other 12 pieces, she takes and puts them all together, and Osiris is reborn. The same thing is true of the Adam Primus. The Adam Primus is broken also into 13 parts. This is to say, this says exactly what we've been talking about all evening. At one time, as the Bible tells in the very first chapter of Romans, it tells at one time we saw to the very unity of the Godhead. And gradually we became more and more separated. We became more and more broken apart. At one time we realized that we were all part of one humanity. And we could all speak to each other with a universal language. At that time also, we realized that it was all one wisdom and not separate branches like sociology and, microbiology or whatever. And this is what was symbolized by the God being hacked into pieces. It was important for our evolution that we learn some things in detail, that we first be able to concentrate on one thing and then another and then another. But now, when we're coming to understand the mysteries again, our concentration should now expand, that we can take all of the separate parts and reunify them and have the rebirth of the original Adam, so in a total state. But a lot of those parts are still laying around. And when we look into something, this is going to be an ambitious course to try and look at a lot of different things. And when we look at these individual parts, we have to be careful because each of those parts still is alive and it still has potency. And unless that part is integrated into the whole, it can be very dangerous. A perfect example is that at one time, one of the elements of learning to leave your body, it isn't any longer, was a breathing. And it was not only the physical breathing, but it had something to do with consciousness being associated with the breath. If that is viewed within the total mystery, it can be seen correctly. If you take one piece and try to live off of that one piece, you say this is live. The thing is about all spiritual studies, all spiritual practices work. As one wag has put it, if you say Coca-Cola enough times, you'll have a profound experience. And it's that sort of thing. Little parts work, and they're alive, and they can be very fascinating. But if taken and consumed as the whole while being a little part, it can be very dangerous. So we're going to try and avoid the fallacy of fragmentation, of taking one little thing as the whole thing. But on the other hand, this is not meant to be eclecticism. This is meant to be viewing the whole, and this is not like comparative religion. Because comparative religion hopes that if you put all those pieces together, you'll see the truth. That's what astrologers hope. They hope that if they put all of the different little gizmos together, they'll have it. It doesn't take into account that somebody might be creative and do something new the next time. And each horoscope is totally different than the last one. The person may be completely creative. In fact, over a few years' time, a person may, what you knew about them before might not apply. Because people are new and people are creative. And so eclecticism, all it does is give you a pattern of the past. The hope is that we're going to tune in to a unified mystery view that when you have the source, when you have the one unity that pervades all of the different living parts, that then it all makes sense. Okay, so what we're going to do then for the next 4 meetings, which will be on alternate weeks, we're going to have one long talk broken into 4 parts. And like the Pythagoreans, I believe that if you know someone's name, you have an advantage over them. And I love naming things. So the next talk, which will be in 4 parts, will be called What is an Aura? Or, I have a great time naming things. Occult cosmography, spiritual worlds, and macrocosm, and microcosm. If nothing else, you can go home and tell your friends that you really attended an impressive sounding lecture. Are there any questions about any of this? Okay. I'll see you in 2 weeks, or some folks tomorrow night, or some folks next week.